I want you to close your eyes for a second. Try to put yourself in London. But I'm not talking about the London of today with the tube, the tourists, and the overpriced coffee.
No, this is a different London.
I'm talking about August 1660. The summer heat is hanging heavy over the city, and the smell, well, the smell is unique. It's a mix of open sewage, the lingering scent of unwashed bodies, horse manure, and increasingly smoke.
And fear. You really can't forget the fear. It creates a specific kind of tension in the air, a sort of brittleness.
Right. The mood is incredibly brittle. This is a city that has spent the last 2 decades tearing itself apart. We're talking about a brutal civil war, the public execution of a king, a military dictatorship, and now the pendulum has swung back.
All the way back.
The monarchy has returned. The cobblestones are full of people celebrating, drinking to the new king, Charles II. But if you were on the wrong side of the last 20 years, if you were a Republican, if you were a Puritan, that celebration sounds like a threat.
Exactly. For the large portion of the population, this isn't a party, it's a purge. And on this specific day, August 27th, that threat becomes very, very literal. If you walked into the Old Bailey, the public square outside the courthouse, you wouldn't see a criminal in the stocks.
Yeah.
You would see the public hangman. But he's not holding a noose. He's holding a torch.
It's such a visceral image. The state isn't just killing people, they're trying to kill ideas. They're burning books. And they aren't just burning random pamphlets or, trashy tabloids.
Well, these are serious political and theological works.
They're burning the works of a man who today we think of as the absolute pillar of English literature, John Milton.
It really is jarring when you contrast it with our modern perception. We have this mental image of Milton as a marble bust in a library, right?
Totally.
The blind, saintly poet who wrote Paradise Lost. We associate him with dusty classrooms, high culture, and maybe struggling through an English lit exam.
Right.
But on that day in 1660, John Milton was public enemy number 1, an enemy of the state.
That distinction is the hook that really grabbed me when we started digging into these sources. How does one of history's greatest poets end up as a target for the hangman?
That's an amazing question.
And more importantly, how does a man who is completely blind, politically ruined, impoverished, and living in hiding, managed to turn around and write the greatest epic in the English language?
It is an incredible story of resilience, but also of incredible stubbornness. I mean, you can't forget the stubbornness. To understand Paradise Lost and to really understand Milton, we have to look past the poetry.
We have to.
We have to strip away the classic literature veneer and see the political operative underneath. We have to see the radical.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to unpack the life and the mind of John Milton. We're going to look at his fight for free speech, which is surprisingly relevant today, his shockingly modern views on divorce, and the secret political messages he hid inside a story about angels and demons.
And we are going to try to do this simply. Because Milton was a scholar, and he wrote about heavy theology and complex politics, but at its core, this is a story about freedom.
Yeah.
Personal freedom, political freedom, and the freedom of the mind.
Exactly. We want to explain this like we're just grabbing coffee and talking about a mutual friend who happens to be a 17th century genius who got himself into a lot of trouble.
A lot of trouble.
So let's rewind the clock. Before the book burnings, before the blindness, let's go back to the beginning. December 9th, 1608, John Milton is born in London.
And to understand the son, you really have to look at the father. His father was also named John Milton. He was a scrivener by trade.
A scrivener. Is that like a scribe? What does that actually mean?
It's similar, but a bit more lucrative. Think of it as a combination of a notary, a copyist, and kind of a banker. He prepared legal documents, contracts, that sort of thing. And he lent money. He made a very good living.
Okay, so they were comfortable.
Very. But the most important detail about the father isn't his job. It's his history. Milton's father had been disinherited by his own father.
Disinherited, that's a big deal.
Right.
Why? What happened?
Religion. Milton's grandfather was a staunch Catholic, but Milton's dad found a Protestant Bible and converted. In that era, that wasn't just a change of church, it was a betrayal of the family identity.
It was treason, almost.
In a way, yes. So the grandfather cut him off completely, told him to get out.
Wow. So Milton is born into this family narrative of rebellion. It's baked in from the start.
Precisely. He grows up knowing that his comfortable life, his education, everything he has, exists because his father was willing to tell authority to shove it. The idea that you stick to your convictions, even if it costs you your inheritance, even if it costs you your family, that is in his DNA from day one.
That sets the stage perfectly. So he grows up in this house that values conscience above all else. And he's smart, right? Like prodigy level smart.
Oh, absolutely. The sources depict him as a voracious reader. Milton later wrote about his own childhood, saying that from the age of 12, he hardly ever went to bed before midnight because he was studying.
Which, we have to remember, means reading by candlelight. That's not like flicking on an LED lamp.
Right. Expensive wax candles if you were lucky, or smelly tallow candles if you weren't. Straining your eyes over small print in dim, flickering light for hours every single night.
That foreshadowing is a bit painful, knowing what happens to his eyes later.
It really is.
But it shows his intensity. He wasn't just doing his homework, he was devouring knowledge.
He was obsessed. He goes to St. Paul's School, which was a top-tier institution, and then he heads off to Christ's College, Cambridge. And this is where we really start to get a glimpse of his personality. He wasn't exactly one of the lads.
I saw this in the notes. He had a nickname at Cambridge, the Lady of Christ's College.
Yes, the lady.
Now, knowing how college students are, even in the 1600s, I have to assume that was not a compliment.
It was a double-edged sword. Physically, yes, he was very fair. The accounts say he had a delicate complexion, refined features, and long auburn hair. By all accounts, he was a beautiful young man.
But the nickname was also an insult regarding his behavior.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about university life then. Drinking, brawling, visiting brothels, roughhousing. That was the norm for young men of his class. Milton would have none of it.
So he was a bit of a prude.
He was fastidious, he was refined, he thought that kind of behavior was beneath him. He was essentially keeping himself pure for greatness. He had this sense, even then, that he was destined for something important and he couldn't sully himself with, common debauchery.
So calling her the lady was a way of mocking him for not being tough or masculine in the way they understood it.
Exactly. He wasn't a rough-and-tumble soldier. He was an intellectual powerhouse who wouldn't join in the drinking songs. He was setting himself apart.
And after Cambridge, he does what wealthy, smart young men did back then. He went on the grand tour.
The 17th century equivalent of a gap year backpacking through Europe, but with more servants and better clothes.
Right, a lot better clothes.
He travels to France, and then he spends a significant amount of time in Italy in 1638.
This must have been a dream for him. He loves the classics, he speaks Latin fluently, and now he's in Rome and Florence.
He's in heaven. He met famous intellectuals. He visited the great academies. He even met Galileo, who was under house arrest by the Inquisition at the time.
Wow, really?
Yes. And that meeting clearly left a mark on him. Seeing the greatest scientist of the age silenced by the church. You can see how that would feed into his later ideas about censorship.
Absolutely. But then the trip gets cut short. He's supposed to go to Sicily and Greece. I mean, the cradle of classical civilization. But he turns around and comes home. Why?
Because of the news. He starts hearing rumors of civil commotions back in England.
Yeah.
The political situation is deteriorating rapidly. And this is a quote that I think defines his character for the rest of his life. He said he thought it was shameful to be traveling for amusement abroad while his fellow citizens were fighting for liberty at home.
That is the pivot point. That is the moment he stops being just a student, just a poet in training, and becomes an activist.
That's it. He realizes that all this learning, all this reading until midnight, all this purity, it has to be for something. It can't just be for his own enjoyment. It has to be applied to the world.
So he comes back to England and he walks right into a political firestorm. This is the lead up to the English Civil War. Now, I feel we need to pause here. For those of us who aren't experts on 17th century British history, it's easy to get lost in the names and dates.
It really is.
Can we simplify what this war was actually about?
Sure. In the simplest terms, it was a fight over who has the ultimate power, the king or the people. And when we say the people, we really mean their representatives in Parliament.
Okay. And who were the players? What were the two sides?
On one side, you have the royalists, also known as Cavaliers. They support King Charles I. Culturally, these are the guys with the long ringlets, the fancy clothes, the love of theater and art. They stood for the established church, tradition, and the divine right of the king to rule.
Meaning the king answers only to God, not to the people.
Correct. The king is God's deputy on earth. If you disobey the king, you're disobeying God. It's a package deal.
And on the other side, who are they fighting?
The parliamentarians. They were often called Roundheads because many of them, though not all, wore their hair cropped short, which was a sign of humility and seriousness.
A sort of anti-fashion statement.
Exactly. They were led by figures like Oliver Cromwell. They wanted to limit the king's power, and they wanted religious reform. This is where the term Puritan comes in.
Okay, let's unpack Puritan, because I feel like we need to do a hard reset on this word. In modern English, calling someone a Puritan is basically an insult.
It really is.
It means you're repressed, you hate sex, you're a killjoy, and you're terrified that someone somewhere might be having a good time.
That is the caricature, yes. And it's effective propaganda that has lasted for centuries, mostly written by the royalists who lost. But if you actually look at the sources from the 1640s, the Puritans didn't see themselves as killjoys.
Oh.
They saw themselves as revolutionaries. In the outline, it refers to this as a second Renaissance.
I love that framing. The first Renaissance, the one in Italy, that was about art, architecture, the intellect.
Precisely. That was the rebirth of the mind and the arts. The Puritans believed they were spearheading the rebirth of the moral nature of man.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means they argued that the Protestant Reformation hadn't gone far enough. Sure, England had split from the Pope, but the Church of England still had bishops. It still had fancy robes, golden altars, and strict hierarchies. To a guy like Milton, that wasn't true religion. That was just Catholicism light.
It was about authenticity then, getting back to basics.
It was about removing the middleman. The core Puritan idea, and this is crucial for understanding Milton, is that absolutely nothing should stand between the individual conscience and God. No king, no bishop, no priest.
So you don't need someone to interpret God for you.
You read the Bible, you use your reason, and you connect with the divine directly. It's a very personal, very internal form of faith.
Which sounds theological, but when you say it out loud, it's actually incredibly political. Because if I don't need a bishop to interpret God for me, do I really need a king to interpret the law for me?
Exactly. You've hit on the danger of it. Once you start demanding liberty of conscience in church, it is a very short step to demanding liberty in Parliament. This is why the royalists were so terrified of them. They weren't just annoying religious zealots. They were dismantling the hierarchy that held society together.
And Milton is all in on this.
He's one of the main intellectual drivers. He believed in what they called the good old cause republicanism. No king. He believed the people, or at least the virtuous, educated people, should rule themselves.
And he didn't just believe it quietly. He got a job, right? He went to work for the new government.
He did. After they executed the king, he became the Secretary for Foreign Tongues to the Council of State. Basically, he was the Secretary of State for Oliver Cromwell's government.
What did he do?
He wrote the letters to foreign governments in Latin, which was the international language of diplomacy, explaining and justifying why England had just cut off its king's head.
Which is a pretty heavy PR job. Dear King of France, sorry about the mess. Here's why we executed your cousin.
It is the ultimate PR job. He was the voice of the revolution. He defended the regicide to the rest of Europe.
But before he gets that big job, he gets into a fight with his own side. And this leads to one of his most famous works, which has a title that is a bit of a tongue twister.
Areopagitica.
Areopagitica. It sounds like an exotic disease, but it's actually a speech.
It's a pamphlet written in the form of a speech, yeah. He never actually delivered it.
So, set the scene for this. The year is 1643. The parliamentarians, the good guys in Milton's eyes, the guys fighting for liberty, are in charge in London. They're winning the argument against the king, and then they do something that makes Milton absolutely furious.
They passed the licensing order.
Which was what, exactly?
It was a law that required authors to get a government license before they could publish a book. They had to submit their manuscript to an official censor.
So someone in an office reads your book and decides if the public is allowed to see it.
Right. If the censor liked it, it got a stamp of approval. If the censor didn't like it, if it was too radical or critical or just too weird, it didn't get printed. End of story.
So it's pre-publication censorship. It's not just punishing you for what you wrote, it's stopping you from writing it in the first place.
Exactly. It's a firewall. And Milton took this personally. Remember, he's a guy who values the free exchange of ideas above almost everything else. He sees this as a profound betrayal.
His own side is doing the censoring.
Yes. Parliament was supposed to be fighting for liberty, and here they are, acting just like the tyrannical king they were fighting against.
So he writes Areopagitica. Why that title? What does it mean?
He's showing off his classical education again. It's named after a speech by Isocrates in ancient Athens, given to the Council of the Areopagus.
Okay.
He's elevating the debate. He's saying, I'm speaking to you not just as a complainer, but as a classical orator speaking to a senate. I am treating you with respect, so you should treat the citizens with respect. A very clever frame.
And the arguments he makes in this document, They are surprisingly modern. Like, if you strip away the 17th century phrasing, these are arguments we still use today.
They absolutely are. He starts with a brilliant historical takedown that was designed to sting. He tells a room full of Protestants, hey, do you know who invented licensing? The Catholic Inquisition.
That is a low blow. That's like telling a room full of American capitalists, you know who invented this system? Stalin.
It's the perfect rhetorical move. He's saying, if you do this, you are no better than the people we hate. You are copying the enemy's playbook. But then he moves to a more philosophical argument. He talks about the nature of a book itself.
I love this quote. It says, a book isn't just paper, it is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit.
Yes, it's a beautiful line. He argues that if you kill a man, you kill a reasonable creature, God's image. But if you destroy a good book, you kill reason itself. You're destroying the very essence of human thought. You are killing immortality. It's a crime against the future.
But then he gets to the argument that I find the most interesting, especially for a Puritan, the trust the reader argument.
This is the core of his theology. Milton believed that God gave humans reason and free will for a purpose we're supposed to choose. He argues that virtue isn't real if you're forced to be good.
Right. It's the Clockwork Orange argument. If I am programmed to be good, or if I never see a bad thing because the government hid it from me, am I actually a good person?
Or are you just sheltered?
Yeah, exactly.
And Milton would say you're just a blank slate, a child. He says we need to encounter bad books and bad ideas so we can learn why they are bad and reject them. He has this amazing line, I cannot praise a fugitive and cloistered virtue.
Cloistered virtue, that's a great phrase.
It means a virtue that hides in a monastery and never goes outside. He says you have to go out into the world, face the dust and heat, look evil in the face and choose the truth. That is the only way to be truly moral.
That is a lot of faith to put in the average reader.
It is. It's a very optimistic, maybe even a little naive view of human nature. He believes that in a free and open encounter, truth will ultimately win against falsehood. He asks this rhetorical question. Whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter?
I feel like the internet age might have tested that theory a little bit. We see a lot of falsehood winning these days.
We do. And maybe Milton didn't anticipate how quickly lies can travel with technology. But the principle remains the bedrock of free speech. The remedy for bad speech isn't censorship. It's more speech. It's better arguments.
He also makes a practical point, doesn't he? He says, basically, where do you stop?
Exactly. The slippery slope. He says if you want to ban bad influences, you can't just stop at books. You'd have to license songs. You'd have to license dancing. You'd have to license conversations. You'd have to license the clothes people wear.
You'd have to become a totalitarian state to actually filter out sin.
Which is exactly what he's warning them against. He says it's impossible. You cannot legislate morality by blocking information. He says it's like trying to keep out crows by shutting the park gate. They'll just fly over.
So he writes this passionate, brilliant, timeless defense of free speech. Does Parliament listen? Do they say, you know what, John, you're right, and repeal the law?
No, not at all.
Of course not.
They ignored him completely. They kept the licensing order in place for decades. But even though it failed in the moment, the document survived. It circulated. And over time, it became the foundational text for the concept of a free press. The U.S. First Amendment owes a massive debt to Areopagitica.
It's amazing how often that happens. The radical idea of today becomes the common sense of tomorrow. But we need to step back a bit, because Milton wasn't just radical about politics and books. He was radical at home, too.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about his domestic life, because this actually connects back to why he was fighting censorship in the first place.
It does. It's the direct cause. In 1642, right around the start of the Civil War, Milton gets married. He is 33 years old. His bride, Mary Powell, is 17.
Yikes. I mean, I know it was common for the time, but that is a big gap.
It is a big gap in age, but an even bigger gap in personality and background. She came from a royalist family, a fun-loving, social, country squire type of family.
Okay.
And Milton is, well, he's Milton, intense, studious, living in London, obsessed with his work and his divine mission.
So he brings this teenage girl back to his quiet, studious house, and it's a disaster.
Total disaster. She leaves him after just 6 weeks. She goes back to her parents' house in the country and refuses to return.
Wow. So Milton is humiliated, he's abandoned, and in 17th century England, you can't just get a divorce because you're unhappy or because your wife left you.
No. Divorce was almost impossible. The church viewed marriage as a divine sacrament. You could get a separation maybe, but you couldn't remarry. The only valid ground was usually adultery, and even that was difficult to prove.
So he's stuck. But Milton, being Milton, decides to write his way out of the problem.
He always does. He writes the divorce tracts.
Right, the doctrine and discipline of divorce.
And he proposes this absolutely radical idea that incompatibility, just not getting along, not having a mental and spiritual companionship, should be a valid reason for divorce.
That sounds incredibly reasonable to us now. We call it irreconcilable differences. It's standard.
But in 1643, this was explosive. It was scandalous. You have to understand, marriage was seen as a way to produce legitimate heirs and avoid sin. It wasn't necessarily about friendship or happiness. Milton argued that if you are stuck in a marriage with someone you can't talk to, someone who doesn't understand your mind, that is a form of spiritual death. He said a bad marriage is a drooping and dying of the spirit.
So he's prioritizing the emotional and intellectual connection over the legal contract.
Exactly. And the backlash was intense. People called him a heretic. They called him a libertine.
Yeah.
Someone who just wanted a license to sleep around. The clergy attacked him from the pulpit. And this is actually what triggered the censorship efforts against him.
Oh, I see the connection now.
They wanted to shut him up about divorce, so they tried to enforce the licensing laws.
So Areopagitica wasn't just abstract philosophy, it was personal. He was defending his right to publish his own controversial views on marriage.
Exactly. Milton's political philosophy always comes from his personal struggle. He feels oppressed by bad marriage laws. He writes about divorce. He feels oppressed by censors. He writes Areopagitica. He feels oppressed by a king. He writes about regicide. He universalizes his own problems into grand principles of liberty. So let's move to the next phase of his life, the fall. Because things get dark for Milton, literally.
Yes. By 1652, Milton is completely blind.
How did it happen? Was it sudden?
It was gradual. He describes a mist descending over his vision, changing the colors of things until eventually it was just darkness. He was only 43 years old. It was likely glaucoma, but of course they had no treatment for that.
That is terrifying for anyone, but for a man whose entire life is reading and writing, that's a death sentence for his career, you'd think.
He believed, and he says this in his sonnets, that he lost his sight because he worked too hard writing defenses for the Republic. He felt he sacrificed his eyes for the cause of liberty. He says he overapplied his eyes in service to the state. That is a heavy burden to carry. I went blind for my country. And then his wife Mary, who did eventually come back, by the way, and they had children, she dies in 1652 as well.
It was a terrible year. He's a widower, he's blind, he has 3 young daughters to raise, but the political situation was about to get even worse.
The Restoration, 1660.
The Republic fails. Oliver Cromwell dies. His son, Richard Cromwell, can't hold the government together. The country falls into chaos. And finally, the English people decide they've had enough of Puritan rule, enough of the army, enough of the instability.
You want a king again.
They invite the son of the executed King Charles II back to the throne.
This must have been Milton's worst nightmare.
It was the end of his world. Everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed his eyesight for, was swept away overnight. The king was back, and the crowds were cheering for him.
And Milton wasn't just a quiet supporter of the Republic. He had written The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates,
which argued that people have the right to execute a tyrant. He had publicly justified the killing of the new king's father. He was the chief propagandist for the regicide.
So he is a marked man. He's at the top of the list.
Absolutely. He went into hiding. We think he hid in a friend's house in West Smithfield. He was eventually arrested and held in custody for several months. His books were burned, as we mentioned at the start.
How did he avoid being executed?
He was fined heavily. He was likely only saved from execution or life imprisonment because he had influential friends, like the poet Andrew Marvell, who pulled some strings and argued that he was just a harmless old blind poet. They downplayed his importance.
So he's released, but he's ruined. He's blind, he's poor, he's defeated, the cause is lost. And then, just to add insult to injury, London burns down.
The Great Fire of 1666.
It started in a bakery on Pudding Lane.
Thomas Farrinor's bakery.
Yeah.
And it just spread. The houses were wood. They were packed close together. It had been a dry summer. The fire raged for 3 days.
The devastation was biblical.
It destroyed over 13,000 houses. It burned down St. Paul's Cathedral. The descriptions are apocalyptic. The sky glowing red, the heat so intense you couldn't get near it.
And remember, Milton is blind. He's living in Bunhill Row on the edge of the fire zone. He can smell the smoke, he can feel the heat, he can hear the screaming and the crashing of stone buildings, but he can't see it.
It's terrifying to imagine. He's living in a sensory world of darkness and fire.
It feels like the end of the world.
It really did. People thought it was a plot by the French or the Dutch. They thought it was God's judgment on a sinful city. And that atmosphere, that sense of apocalypse, of a world destroyed by fire, of a great fall from grace that finds its way directly into his masterpiece.
Paradise Lost.
This is the moment. He's cut off from the political world. He can't write pamphlets anymore. So he turns inward. He goes back to his original ambition from when he was a young man to write a great epic poem that would rival Homer and Virgil.
But the process of writing this, it's mind-boggling. He's blind. He can't write it down. How did he do it?
He composed it in his head, usually at night, just lying in bed in the dark. He would wake up in the morning and tell his family that he needed to be milked.
Milked!
That was his word for it. He felt like a cow full of milk. The verses were building up inside him, and he needed to get them out before he burst.
And he dictated it to his daughters, right?
Yes, and to assistants or friends who came to visit. Imagine the scene. A blind man sitting in a chair reciting 40 lines of complex, beautiful iambic pentameter from memory, perfectly formed, while someone scratches it out with a quill.
And then what?
Then he would ask him to read it back to him so he could edit it in his head. It's an incredible feat of memory and intellect.
It's superhuman. So, on the surface, Paradise Lost is the biblical story of Adam and Eve. The fall of man, Satan rebels, gets kicked out of heaven, tempts Eve, they eat the apple, they get kicked out of Eden. Simple Sunday school stuff.
That is the surface, but this is Milton. There's nothing simple about it. This is a deep dive. So we have to look at the hidden messages, because Paradise Lost isn't just a religious poem, it's a political one.
You mentioned in the outline that there is a secret political and theological code in this poem.
There is. Let's start with the theology, because it unlocks the politics. The poem contains a heresy called Arianism.
Okay, I saw this in the notes. This is the idea that rejects the Trinity, right?
Simply put, yes. Orthodox Christianity says God the Father and Jesus the Son are co-eternal. They are equal, part of the same substance. Arianism says no, the Son is a created being. He is separate from the Father. He is subordinate.
Now, usually I'd say, who cares? That sounds like a debate for guys in robes to have in a dusty basement. But you're saying this specific theological tweak changes the entire political meaning of Paradise Lost.
It changes everything. Think about it. If the Son is not God by nature, if he isn't born into the position of ruler, then why does he get to rule?
He has to earn it.
Exactly. In Milton's version of heaven, God the Father explains that the Son is elevated to the throne not because of his birthright, but because of his merit. There's a line where God says the Son is worthiest to be so by being good, far more than great or high.
Oh, wow. I see what he's doing. He's smuggling a meritocracy into heaven.
He is. He's making a direct argument against the divine right of kings. Charles II claimed he should rule England simply because he was Charles I's son. It was a matter of bloodline, of birthright.
Right.
Milton is using the Bible to say, even the Son of God didn't get his job based on bloodline. He got it because he was the best person for the job. He earned it through his virtue and his willingness to sacrifice himself.
That is incredibly subversive. He's basically subtweeting the King of England using the gospel.
And it suggests that any earthly king who rules just because of his last name is actually inferior to the system of heaven. It validates the Republic. Even after the Republic has fallen, it's his last great political argument, hidden in plain sight.
But then we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Or rather, the snake in the garden.
Satan, the star of the show for many readers.
Everyone who reads Paradise Lost, especially since the Romantics like Blake and Shelley, they all say the same thing. Satan is the most interesting character. He gets all the best lines.
He absolutely is. He's dynamic, he's passionate, he's defiant.
He's charismatic, he gives these rousing speeches. He's a rebel fighting against an absolute monarch. I mean, doesn't that sound like Milton? Republican revolutionary.
That is the great tension of the poem, and it's absolutely deliberate. Satan sounds like a revolutionary. Listen to his famous lines. He wakes up in hell, defeated, and he says, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven."
That sounds like stoicism. It sounds empowering. I control my own mind no matter where I am.
And then the ultimate line of rebellion. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
It's the ultimate freedom slogan. Live free or die. So is Milton secretly on Satan's side? Is Satan the hero?
This is the trap Milton sets for us. He makes Satan attractive. He makes him sound like a freedom fighter because Milton knows what that language sounds like. He used it himself. But we have to look closer. What is Satan actually fighting for?
Freedom, liberty.
He talks about freedom, but what he really wants is power. He refuses to serve God, but he demands that all the other demons serve him. He sets up a throne in hell. He creates a court. He acts exactly like the tyrants Milton hated.
Oh, I see. So Satan isn't the Republican hero. Satan is the demagogue. He is the charismatic leader who uses the language of liberty to set up a dictatorship.
Precisely. Satan is a warning. He shows how easily we can be seduced by a leader who talks a big game about rights and freedom, but is purely motivated by pride and self-interest. Milton knows that the line between a revolutionary and a tyrant is very, very thin. He saw it happen with his own eyes during the Civil War.
He saw people who started out as heroes become corrupted by power.
He certainly saw Cromwell become a dictator, in effect. So Satan is a study in that kind of corruption. He's the ultimate selfish rebel. His liberty is only for himself.
That is such a nuanced take. It's not just good versus evil. It's a study in psychology and politics. It's about how we get tricked by beautiful words.
And it reflects Milton's own disillusionment. He watched the English Revolution start with high ideals and end in failure in The Return of the King. He watched his own side struggle with power. He knows that true liberty is hard, and it's very easy to get wrong.
So the poem ends with Adam and Eve leaving the garden. They've lost paradise. But it's not a completely hopeless ending, is it?
No, not at all. The final lines are beautiful and full of a kind of quiet hope. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and Providence their guide.
What does that mean?
It means they have lost the easy, unthinking life of Eden, but they have gained the world. They have to go out into the hard, messy reality of human history and make their own way. They have to find a paradise within.
Which brings us back to that idea of personal responsibility. You have to choose the good every day. You can't just live in a walled garden.
Exactly. The fall from grace is also the beginning of true human virtue.
So Milton spends his final years living quietly in Bunhill Row. He writes a sequel, Paradise Regained, which, let's be honest, nobody reads.
It's actually quite good. It's a very different poem. It's about Jesus resisting Satan's temptations in the desert. But yeah, it lacks the epic drama and the battles of the first one.
And he writes one last major work, Samson Agonistes.
A tragedy about Samson. The biblical figure who was strong, a champion of his people, lost his way, was blinded and enslaved by his enemies, the Philistines.
Talk about a self-portrait. You can't get more obvious than that.
It is heartbreakingly autobiographical. Samson is blind, surrounded by the Philistines, who represent the royalists, mocked by them. He is forced to perform for them. But in the end, Samson finds his strength one last time.
Right, he's in the temple.
He asks to be placed between the two main pillars, and he pulls the pillars down and destroys the temple, taking his enemies with him.
It's Milton's fantasy of a final victory, a final act of defiance against the world that rejected him.
It is. It shows that even at the end of his life, blind and defeated, he never gave up. He never recanted. He died in 1674, still a radical, still a believer, still convinced he was right.
So let's wrap this up. What is the legacy here? Why are we still talking about a Puritan from the 1600s in the year 2026?
Well, obviously the poetry. Paradise Lost changed the English language. It influenced everyone from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. The way we visualize hell and Satan today comes largely from Milton and not from the Bible.
But beyond the poetry, what's the big idea we should take away?
It's the ideas. Milton gave us the vocabulary of modern freedom. He taught us that truth isn't something the government hands you in a licensed book. Truth is something you have to fight for in the marketplace of ideas.
He taught us that conflict-clashing ideas is necessary, that we shouldn't be afraid of bad ideas because we need them to sharpen the good ones.
Yes. He was a man of massive contradictions. A Puritan who loved music and culture, a revolutionary who worked for the state, a devout Christian who held heretical views. But in those contradictions, he forged this incredible defense of the individual mind.
And that leads me to a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Go for it.
Milton argued that we need to read bad books and encounter bad ideas to truly understand the good ones. He hated the idea of a censor deciding what was safe for us to see.
Right. He trusted the reader to use their own reason to filter it themselves.
Today, we don't have a government licensor stamping our books, but we have algorithms, we have social media feeds that are designed to show us exactly what we already agree with. We have echo chambers.
We are licensing our own reading.
Exactly. We are voluntarily doing what Milton fought against. We are censoring our own world so we never have to be challenged. If Milton were alive today, looking at our curated feeds where we only see opinions we like, I think he'd be furious.
I think he'd tell us to go read something that makes us angry, to find an argument we disagree with and try to understand it.
I think he would. He'd say, go find a heretic and listen to them. And on that note, Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the mind of John Milton.
It's been a pleasure.
See you next time.